It's a Monday morning, I'm on the bike. I'm in a car park at Heffron Park. I'm just going to take this opportunity to introduce a commentary that I just recorded, and let you know that it's entirely impromptu. I just basically had some thoughts on my mind as I was pedalling around the place on the day when, or the day or two after, geo-blocking came into effect with regards to coverage of the Tour de France in Australia. So settle in, this is quite a long video. It's completely unscripted, it's just basically some thoughts that came to mind while I was riding. It relates to something that I think a lot of the people who watch this channel are passionate about, and that is the coverage of cycling. And you know, there's a lot more I could say about it, and some of it isn't very, very kind, actually, and it's not about my personal experiences, although they've been pretty average when it comes to my association with SBS over the last few years. But that said, I've had a long history trying to work with, all media in Australia to improve the coverage of the sport which I have worked in for over 30 years and that I love, and that I wish more people could watch. So settle in, it's a long rant. It starts while I'm riding around on the bike, and then I settle down and I sit down and I try and offload all of my thoughts. I don't know if I'm going to achieve all of that because, you know, there's 30 years of build-up in there. But here's an attempt to at least sort of try and make sense of what's going on with the broadcast of the Tour de France and other cycling events in Australia in 2023. I don't know if I can say enjoy, but, you know, let me know your thoughts. I'm really keen. Please leave a comment below if you have anything to say about about this discussion that has been ignited over the weekend. Onto the goat track of Heffron Park, and a little bit of a sanctuary from traffic. Given that I'm now amongst the parrots, as you can probably hear, and away from traffic, and yesterday was a Sunday in which, well, I'll jump straight to the point, when I put up a tiny little questionnaire on the Ride Media Facebook page asking about how you watch the Tour de France. It was sort of a little bit of a response to the fact that on Friday evening, a streaming service that had been available for almost 2 weeks as the Tour de France of 2023 was pulled from the air and made redundant to Australian audiences, and that is to say GCN Plus, which has been doing an outstanding job of covering the race and offering their services for an event that many cycling fans want to watch, was revoked for Australian audiences. It was geo-blocked. It is geo-blocked. You can't watch it anymore. You could watch 13 stages of it, maybe 14, I can't remember, but not for the last week. Surrender. Now, good morning. Our public broadcaster, SBS, Special Broadcasting Services, has flexed their muscle, as I've known them to do, and they've created an arrangement which allows them to have exclusive rights to the Australian market for the broadcast of the Tour de France. That's all well and good, isn't it? You might think. But the thing is, everything's a little bit different in 2023 because people have had a taste of other broadcast mechanisms, other networks, other personalities, other commentators, other presentations, and the GCN Plus offerings, which you had been able to find, was fantastic. Honestly, Orla, I think you do a great job as an anchor. I think you ignite the conversation beautifully well. I think you bring interest, personality, even a little bit of intrigue, and you team up beautifully with the likes of Robbie McEwen and Dan Lloyd and Adam Blythe, etc., etc., etc. And I will say it one more time. I'm not at the tour, so I'm in Sydney and I'm watching from afar. Hear a plane overhead, sorry about that noise. And so I had decided I'll do as much as I can watching what Australians are meant to watch while I follow the sport that I love and an event that I know well. And I watched SBS for the first week. And at this point in time, I can say I don't want to hear at this point in time ever again, because not every time, but very, very often when Simon Gerrans talks, he says at this point in time. Now, most of the time that's superfluous, but I put up with it. I got a lay of the land at this point in time and realised that, yeah, they're pitching for a different kind of audience to me. So I accept that, no problem. All well and good. You know, can't please everyone. But where do I go from here? Anyway, after about 7 days of at this point in times, I thought I might have a little look-see and just find out if I can see the tour in a different way. And I logged into GCN Plus and ta-da! I was happy to see the fact that I could watch the breakaway, which is a I don't know if it's a what do you call it, studio discussion amongst Dan and Robbie and Orla and Adam, and they talk about the stage before, they preview the stage that's coming up, and I was like, wow, this is great. In advance of the Puy de Dôme stage, stage 9, they did a preview which I thought was just terrific. And I said to my wife, this is it, I'm converted, I'm going to just stay with GCN because it's just easier on the mind. I don't get so frustrated at this point in time. And that was good for a couple of days. But then it stopped. I logged on Friday night, couldn't get in. And having had meetings with Ken Shipp, the head of sport for SBS, I think that's still his title, in the past, I know that he quite prides himself on the fact that he can geo-block the coverage from other broadcasters because, as he rightfully points out, SBS has paid for that coverage, so they want to have that exclusivity that is part of being the national broadcaster, the national public broadcaster, the network of cycling. All these things that you could call SBS. Right, now that brings us up to speed a little bit. I'm going to get off the bike and I'm going to sit down and try and finish this discussion because I think it's one that a lot of people are interested in. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it because the response to my little questionnaire on Facebook yesterday was considerable, and unfortunately there was also quite a lot of vitriol, despite me asking if everyone could please kindly keep the conversation civil. But people get emotional about their cycling coverage. That's a fact. So I'm going to settle down over there and I'll talk a little bit more about this topic. And then I'll just try and get it out of my head and then move on. So instead of rolling around Heffron Park, I'm sat on the bench at the netball courts near Heffron Park to try and offload some of these thoughts that have been building over the last day, over the last 30 years, in fact, when in the span of time when a lot of us have come to watch cycling on television. Now, a couple of things. Does anyone watch television per se any longer? That's kind of interesting in the scheme of things. What I mean by that, are you streaming? Are you running through the SBS On Demand? Were you logging in and watching GCN Plus via your computer, via Apple TV, via many mechanisms that exist to use digital content rather than old-fashioned television broadcasts. Because if you have, then my feeling is this: it's a modern world, and one of the great things about digital content is that it can be tracked. It does provide a considerable amount of data collection. You know, people can tune in. If you have to watch it, if you watch SBS on demand, you need to log in. If you watch GCN Plus, you need to log in. So, because of that, my feeling is it's more trackable, traceable. It's more possible to provide analysis and ratings of digital content than it is for television, because television ratings are they're a pretty loose arrangement. And even though that data exists, I have tried and tried and tried to get some feedback from SBS since the Tour de France of 2022 finished, because I wanted to know how the new commentary team of Bridie O'Donnell, Matt Keenan, Simon Gerrans, Dave Macker, Gracie Elvin, did I say everyone, how they performed in the year when the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift began. Because in my appraisal, while watching from afar, I thought that the women's race was an outstanding expose of cycling, a great showcase of sport, and I was curious to know if that innovation from ASO, the organisers of the Tour de France, Omri Sport organisation, had indeed attracted more viewers. Now, I tell you all of that because despite my many, many, many efforts to get some data based on SBS's analytics, their ratings, let's say, there was never, ever, ever a response from the network. There was never a response from the network. I have a series of emails to various people within SBS asking about the ratings, including the head of sport, Ken Shipp, including multiple PR coordinators. And then I have a string of text messages coming back to me saying, don't contact this person, contact that person. And I'd done everything I could possibly do to get a little bit of feedback from SBS about how their cycling coverage rates. Never have I received anything of value. I've had some overviews and some more commentary about who the commentators will be for the 2023 race, and I've seen little bits of detail here and there, but considering that I'm the publisher of the official Tour de France guide and they're broadcasters, the official broadcasters of the Tour de France in Australia, you would think that there might be a little bit of a crossover and a little bit of collaboration and a little bit of an opportunity to, just share the love a little bit. But they didn't supply any ratings data, and now we're in this situation where, whether you like it or not, the only way to watch the Tour de France, unless you get a VPN and log into GCN or various other streaming services to capture a broadcast of the race that most people like to watch, then you are now obliged to watch via SBS. So we're in that situation for the final week of the 110th Tour. Now, the overwhelming tone of the feedback to my survey or my questionnaire on Facebook yesterday is that there's a disgruntled audience. Now, that happens often, and I sort of had made a pledge to myself not to talk about the commentary of cycling while the Tour de France of 2023 was on, because it becomes a very heated debate or a highly emotional topic. And that happened again yesterday, and we're in the situation now where Australians are kind of obliged to watch SBS whether they like it or not, and you're not allowed to tune into the breakaway. You can't do that because it's all been geo-blocked. Now technology allows that, but going back to the point that I began when I sat down, how about we now ask SBS, or if SBS has gone to the lengths to have other streaming services blocked for the Australian audiences, then surely we could ask this public broadcaster, which is spending taxpayer money to send people to the Tour de France, just a little bit of for a little bit of feedback on how their initiatives are going, on how the new commentary team is working out, on how the audience is responding to their different broadcasts, like Bonjour le Tour and that cooking show that I don't know the name of because I can't stand watching it. You know, can we get a little bit of an overview on how this is working out, panning out, how it is rating, how audiences, if audiences are tuning in greater numbers, in smaller numbers? No. I'm going to try again today, but I don't like my chances. Still, I'm going to get this round out of my head so that I can just basically move on and get to the end of the tour, enjoy the racing, which has just been spectacular, and then ideally just sort of get on with life without these sort of late night sessions in front of the television, or actually, in my case, in front of the streaming service. I see their merit in being an attempt to lure in a broader audience with what SBS is doing. Oh, I get the logic of trying to bring more people into the cycling realm by, let's say, dumbing down the coverage a little bit to bring in the casual viewer. That's what the Tour de France is fantastic for. It's always done that. It lures people to this wonderful thing we call bike racing. And then people get engaged by it, they learn about it more, and then they ideally buy the official Tour de France guide and provide other media with a little bit of revenue and by growing the audience. Now that's a fantastic initiative. But as someone pointed out on the questionnaire on Facebook yesterday, given the time slot of when the Tour de France is broadcast in Australia, which is to say it finishes around 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m., around then, that is a time slot where the truly passionate supporter of the sport is going to be tuning in, and the casual viewer might be catching some good rest, you know, in the land of Z, as in having a snooze, sleeping, and then they might tune in the next day and find out about, you know, where the tour went and blah, 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 and who the leader is and who won the stage and so on and so forth. So there are ways and means of, you know, doing a highlights package which appeals to the casual viewer. And SBS is doing a great job on that. They provide a wealth of highlights programs. There's stacks of different options for your viewing. You can just tune in the morning when you're having your breakfast, and you can watch the highlights package, and you can watch the entire stage live again, or you can watch the entire stage replay again if that's what you choose. But I just can't understand why a public broadcaster is able to basically monopolise an event that has a broad appeal, and other broadcasters giving people the option to view it as pure enthusiasts, as in Global Cycling Network, you know, GCN, like GCN Plus. It's part of a big group which offers a very comprehensive service, and it was working out pretty well for everyone. We'll see if SBS can respond with some ratings information, and we'll see if their ratings have been suddenly bolstered by the fact that the geo-blocking has come into play. But what is worth trying to consider is, even though SBS is doing an admirable job, and they've supported the sport, they've grown the sport, and they've grown the audience for cycling in Australia with outstanding work over the last 30 years, if it's so good, why are people willing to pay for an alternative? And they're not only willing to pay for a subscription to GCN, they're willing to now pay for a VPN so that they can sort of negate the geo-blocking that has come into play. So the willingness and the very vocal group that is telling me that they are willing to do that would suggest that SBS has got something a little bit wrong. Now, these things happen, and we're all tolerant people, and we all want to see cycling on our television, which is a real treat now. It used to be so difficult to watch, but now we can. And we expect it, and we like it. But We don't like it when a public broadcaster is dictating how we watch and monopolising an event which should be able to be viewed by people who are passionate about the sport in a variety of ways which exist in the modern world. It's just upsetting, I think, that the opportunity to grow cycling has come again. The Australian presence of the Tour is greater than it's ever been, insofar that there's 12 riders, which is equal to the record number of participants from Australia. We've won a stage, we've worn the yellow jersey thanks to the amazing efforts of Jai Hindley. There's a lot to be cheering about, but there's a myopic, stubborn mindset at play at SBS, which I think is not allowing the audience to see what they want to see. I could go on, but that's already a really long rant, but it's just to try to overview the situation that emerged yesterday. I'm really, really interested in your feedback. I do all of this reluctantly because I don't like ranting. It's not a rant, it's just me talking about something that has come up recently and ignited a considerable discussion. I think SBS should start reading the room and start coming up with alternatives to the commentary team, coming up with alternatives to how the tour can be seen, and at least working within the community to try and get a little bit of goodwill back, because that just seems to have fallen out the window, and it's a great shame. I thank SBS for everything that they've done for cycling in Australia over the years, but I do question what's going on with this bullyish approach and geo-blocking insistence. What do you think? Let me know. I'm really keen to know what other people think about the broadcast of the Tour de France in Australia in 2023.